Thank you very much. So, a few years ago, I was visiting Walt Disney World with my family, and I have a friend who works in Imagineering, and he decided to give me a tour of his latest project. It was a mobile game for children around Epcot Center using the theme of Kim Possible, one of their characters. Now, if you're familiar with Disney World, you'll know that Epcot's World Showcase is the least kid-friendly part of Disney World. It's a series of national pavilions where you can buy local handicrafts and, of course, booze. And they had a business problem. They needed to figure out how to keep children occupied while their parents were drinking and shopping their way around this sort of miniature simulacrum of our planet. So they made this Kim Possible game. They had a series of riddles delivered to special mobile phones they gave to the kids that they would solve by seeking out clues inside each of the national pavilions. So when I first heard about this, I thought it was going to be an awkward afternoon because I assumed that this was going to be, you know, creepy. Because this is Disney, after all. This is the company that fingerprints your children when they visit the theme park. And they don't even call it fingerprinting. They say they're capturing the unique biometric characteristics of your fingertip. But it turned out that it was very clever indeed and not at all creepy. These special phones that they had didn't send out a radio beacon telling Disney headquarters where children and their parents were. Instead, the players used the sensors in the phone to detect radio beacons being emitted by the solutions to the riddles. So not only was this computationally less intensive and much more elegant and reliable than keeping track of where everyone was at all times, it was also less creepy. Because there is something off about a game where the game tokens themselves follow children around and tell a large corporation where they are, what they're doing, and what their parents are up to as well. And there is something elegant and sweet about using human beings as sensors instead of things to be sensed. After all, we're good at sensing things. We're not perfect. We lack the diligence and the capacity to sustain attention that our technological offspring have. But we are good at making patterns, and we are good at making decisions. That's why Galaxy Zoo, the astronomy project that asks random internet users without any special training to classify objects that were detected by the Hubble, gets better results than out of people than they do out of machine learning algorithms. And it's also why Google's PageRank algorithm works. They measure the links that people make between pages, and that's proven so far more effective than parsing out the pages themselves. It's a machine-human collaboration that lets humans do what humans are good at, making decisions, and lets computers do what computers are good at, counting stuff. In this case, the decisions people have made. Now, there are plenty of reasons why you might want to count a person instead of asking a person to count a thing. But technical elegance and efficiency are rarely on the minds of system designers when it comes to gathering and analyzing data on human activity. More often, these systems are designed under the rubric of taking something valuable from users, their personal information, and giving them something valuable in return, the service that they're using. This is the so-called privacy bargain, and it's the ideological basis for much of the commercial activity in the modern world and nearly all of the activity on the internet. But as many people have noted, this is a curiously one-sided and non-negotiated sort of bargain. To understand what I mean by this, please listen carefully to the following statement. Listen carefully. By listening to this talk, you agree on behalf of your employer to release me from all obligations and waivers from any and all non-negotiated agreements, licenses, terms of service, shrink wrap, click wrap, browse wrap, confidentiality, non-disclosure, non-compete, and acceptable use policies that I've entered into with your employer, its partners, its licensors, its agents, and assigns in perpetuity without prejudice to my ongoing rights and privileges. You further represent that by listening to this talk, you have the authority to release me from any of the aforementioned on behalf of your employer. Now, this is the kind of agreement that the privacy bargain runs on, and in fact, it's actually much worse on the internet. To be better analogous to the internet's style of bargaining, instead of reading you this agreement here from the podium, I would print it on a very small card in 8-point gray on black type, and I would hide it beneath your seats. And then I would add a sentence to the end of it that went like this: "This agreement is subject to change without notice." Now, there are lots of players in the funny agreement game, but if there's one company that's going to bring home the gold for America in the 2024 Cyber Olympiad, it's Facebook. There's a company that makes it that does everything it can to make it difficult, if not impossible, to figure out the nature of the bargain you're making with them. It's a company that designed its service to act as a giant Skinner box aimed at teaching you to systematically undervalue your privacy and the trades you make with it. This is why they have these frequent opt-out privacy policy changes, where any preferences that the users have expressed about the bargain they're willing to make, the information they're willing to trade for the service they get, are obliterated by system-wide changes that always create an enormous public outcry about this new design. And then there's a public climb down from Facebook that resets the status quo to just like before, only a little less private, and then a revision to their privacy preferences to make them more opaque and murkier and harder to understand. The first half of this pattern, asking for a lot and settling for a little less, is familiar to anyone who's ever parented a toddler. "Daddy, I'd like a fudge cake, a bicycle, and a trip to Disney World." "I'm sorry, that's out of the question." "All right then, I'll settle for the bicycle and the fudge cake." Now the second half, making preferences more complicated and more confusing, is familiar to anyone who's ever been conned at a bar bet or lost money on a craps table, because of course that's how those sorts of games work. Rather than presenting their propositions as simple transactions, you give me this much privacy and I'll give you this much service, the new settings complexify things, the way all of those fancy lines on a craps table do, or the way that a short con bar hustler does, adding complexity to the probabilities and the payout so that you can't readily compare them in your head and figure out when the odds are in your favor. What's more, Facebook and the services like it, by design or by accident, have all the mechanics of a rigged game. You get some stimulus, positive social attention from the people you care about when you make a disclosure, but not every time, only intermittently. It's the same mechanism that experimental psychologists use to get rats to press food pellet levers long after they're satiated. And it's the same mechanism that slot design machiners use when they program the schedule of payouts. And it's why so many of the scratch-and-win lotto cards award a small prize, usually another ticket, so that you play again. Maybe Facebook and companies like it hit on this idea by accident in the early days. But today, when they employ enormous brain trusts of social scientists and psychologists on their staff, it would be terribly credulous to call this continued refinement of the strategy anything but deliberate. But even when the privacy bargain is struck in good faith by players on all sides, it's hard to price your privacy well. As a species, we struggle enormously with pricing the long-term cost of a present-day disclosure. An example of this is my grade 3 teacher when I was 8. He had a baby, he and his wife, in hospital, and shortly afterwards were visited by a marketing company, a representative from a marketer, who said, "I have a basket of presents for your new child. It's got nappies, it's got onesies, baby grows, it's got formula and wipes, and all sorts of things that a new parent could need. And all I need from you is your child's name and date of birth and your home address so we can continue our relationship as your child ages." And he gave it to them, and his child died. And every year, year after year, on his dead child's birthday, he received birthday cards and presents for the child who died. It's hard to be good at privacy because how often do we give our personal information to marketers in a maternity ward for a child who dies afterwards? How much practice do we get when we're pricing the potential cost of giving away what seems like a harmless bit of information on a very happy day? So these problems, where consequences are separated from by a long gap of time and space from a decision, are the kinds of problems that we, generally speaking, never get good at solving. So back in the old days, before digital cameras, the average American family was shooting 2 rolls of film a year. They'd shoot one at Christmas and birthdays and one on the family vacation. And they'd send them to the lab, and the photos would come back. And some would be good, and some would be terrible. And you could go through them and say, I'll keep that one, and I'll chuck that one out, and I'll keep that one, and I'll chuck that one out. But you could never remember what it was you did all those months ago to make the good one, so you could do more of it. And you'd never remember what mistake you made all those months ago to make the bad one, so that you could avoid making those mistakes again. The mere act of closing the feedback loop, putting the picture on the back of the camera right after we've taken it. Are you holding up a sign for me? You're holding up the wrong side. There we go. Thank you. The mere act of thank you. The mere act of taking these pictures and being able to see it right after you've taken it made us into such good photographers that we now actually buy software like Hipstamatic to make our pictures look worse so that they will seem authentic to us, because the photos we take now have such good composition and look so good that they seem to have been taken by studio photographers and are somehow posed. Now, there are lots of problems that share these characteristics: smoking, obesity. It takes a long time after eating a cupcake to understand the consequences of eating that cupcake. If it showed up on our hips the moment we put it in our mouth, that would really change our behaviors. Now, how do we beat these compulsive pathological behaviors where they exist in the wild? Well, we do things like education. Right now, in the world of privacy, mostly that consists of running around patronizingly wagging our fingers at children, telling them to stop using Facebook. We do things with regulations and laws, and regulators have tried to solve the privacy problem in lots of ways. Some say they'll make following do not track headers mandatory. Others say that they'll establish this you own your data regime. But I'm skeptical of both of these efforts. Do not track would be trivial to ignore. There's no built-in enforcement, and detecting violations would be very hard. Nothing short of a full-on colonoscopic investigation of a company's servers would tell you whether or not they're obeying do not track. You own your own data, I think, would be a technical nightmare to implement. And besides, it will likely require firms to gather and retain more information about their users so they can figure out who their users are so that they know whose data they own. Besides, creating ownership rights in public facts like dates of birth or telephone numbers creates far more problems than it solves. 15 years into the internet copyright wars, haven't we learned enough to know that pretending that copying is the kind of thing we can control in the age of the internet generates all sorts of terrible problems? Have we learned nothing from the disastrous train wreck that is the music industry? We have lots of ways to talk about valuable things without creating yet another property-like right. We have the idea of interest in things and people. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. I'm going to be flying home to London right after our panel to get her from the daycare. And I have a powerful interest in her, but so does the state, and so does my wife, her mother, and so do her grandparents, and so do her school, and so do her friends, and so on, and especially so does she. But none of these are described as a property interest. If we are to regulate information, let us find information-like regimes to use in the regulation. And while we're trying to get that right, let's remember that there's another lever in the policy fight, not just laws and not just norms, but we have code as well, technology design. So think about how we used code to solve another noxious internet problem, pop-up ads. You remember pop-up ads? Do you remember you'd visit a web page and your browser, what programmers call ironically your user agent, would, at the behest of someone else, some marketing creep, blanket your desktop in tiny windows, and each time you closed one, it would spawn another. They'd play music. They'd run away from your cursor. They'd spawn at 1 pixel squared and play techno music. What happened to pop-ups? We didn't make them illegal. No, what happened was Mozilla happened to pop-ups. Mozilla finally shipped a browser that was a user agent, a browser that acted in the interests of its users and blocked pop-ups. And that made pop-ups disappear. And it was a funny thing, because they didn't just disappear for Mozilla users. When a small, tech-savvy minority of users stopped seeing pop-ups, companies stopped demanding them. Competing browser vendors started adding pop-up blockers to their browsers because they worried about losing users to the browser that acted like a user agent. Now, there was a short-lived arms race to put pop-ups on the desktops of people who'd sought out browsers that blocked them. But sending pop-ups in an era where pop-ups are ubiquitous is very different from sending pop-ups in an era in which they're perceived as having lost in the marketplace. As a tactic, sending pop-ups became so odious that even spammers, pornographers, and Viagra bootleggers more or less abandoned it. I think that cookie managers could be the new pop-up blocker. And boy, do we ever need it. The privacy bargain is a myth because it says that people consent to being tracked when they don't block cookies. But have you ever tried to selectively block cookies? I invite you to try it. Just create a new user for your browser, open the privacy preferences, and check off Ask Me Each Time under When Should I Accept a Cookie. See how long you last. I made it about 10 minutes. The number of decisions you have to make to load even a simple page when you block cookies, complex and subtle decisions, is nearly infinite. Over and over again, you're asked to assess whether you want to accept some cryptically named cookie, some of which reload every few seconds. And there's no way to know a priori which of these cookies are useful to you, which keep you logged into a commenting system, for example, and which ones are just following you around and giving you nothing in the bargain. Now, this is in part the fault of people like me who operate websites that set cookies. But it's also the fault of browser design. If browsers made it as easy to manage cookies as it is to manage bookmarks or logins or form data or past searches, some appreciable fraction of users would manage their cookies. And we should all want that. Because the privacy bargain shouldn't consist of people who can't figure out how to use their browsers, so we get to suck as much information as we want out of their machines and call it an even trade. It should be people gave informed consent to this trade. When we give users the power to treat their private data as valuable, companies that offer better services, maybe your company, will be able to get more data from their users than companies that offer bad services, perhaps like your competitors, because users will be able to choose. I think a world where users can control their data emissions would be a very different one to the one that we live in today. Once, in the early days of ad-supported websites, advertisers would accept the analytics generated by the site operators, but not anymore. Now, if you visit a website with 15 ads, you will get 15 trackers, one for each of the ad for advertiser or broker. Some pages for major services will have over 100 trackers. How do we get to a model where there's less pressure on the people who operate websites to gather their users' information? Well, we can make it possible for users to decline to give it. And just as a few years ago, advertisers decided entirely to stop demanding pop-ups because people block them on site, they might also start to temper their tracking efforts and their demand that everyone gets to track every user. We are in a shooting war between the analytics people and the users, but the users aren't armed. Browser vendors have it in their power to arm users. And there's room for new commercial operators in that very boring and stolid state. Money on the table for anyone who wants to get into the business of arming the rebels instead of just the empire. Now, of course, a cookie manager will only allow you to manage real cookies, not ever cookies or sneaky cookies that use HTML5 tricks or Flash to hide from their users. But we have a pretty cool business model for those cookies. Security researchers like Ashkan Soltani uncovered their existence and published scholarly papers about them. Plaintiff-side class action lawyers read those technical papers. Courts beat the hell out of the companies that use them and transfer enormous sums of money to the plaintiff-side lawyers, and the ever cookies go away. But of course, some of you don't work on desktop software. Some of you are interested in the cloud. Now, I like the cloud. I like the cloud when it was just something we doodled on the whiteboards. But there's plenty of stuff that I like about clouds and that I want from them. Zero knowledge, forward secret, encrypted commodity storage, and virtual machines. Repositories that my apps can use to throw little chunks of state data so that I can sync up across my devices and within my work group. But I worry an awful lot about how vulnerable the cloud is to a denial of service attack. Not the kind of denial of service attack that you get from Anonymous and its low-orbit ion cannon, but the kind of denial of service attack that you get from Senator Joe Lieberman's staffers and their telephones. Only Amazon and Joe Lieberman know for sure what the discussions that resulted in Amazon shutting down WikiLeaks looked like. But the informed speculation I've heard from people at Amazon and on the Hill is that someone on the senator's staff rang up Amazon and said, "Nice cloud you've got here. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it." Because when you operate a server farm running virtual machines and commodity storage that are balanced across racks and racks of hardware, it's not easy for the police to come in and seize a single customer's data as part of their evidentiary process. We already hear today about search warrants that end up being served through the seizure of entire racks rather than an individual blade, because law enforcement can't guarantee that it has the right hardware to do forensics on the blade without mounting it in the rack that it's shipped in. This kind of law enforcement blackout is just getting started, and it's going to put cloud operators in a very unhappy position where they have to reject any customer who has any chance of generating a search warrant or getting embroiled in legal discovery. Or they're going to have to figure out how to build systems that are robust through some combination of zero knowledge, not knowing what they have, having nothing stored in the clear, and nothing that anyone could usefully seize, and good compliance software that can readily package up one customer's threads, storage, and other data in a neat, forensically valid, trustworthy component. Now, we carry elaborate sensor packages on our persons at all time. And our computers generate about our lives, information about our lives and as we work and live. And it's not evil or crazy to want to figure out how to use these things to improve our lives with products and services. I mean, it's in the spirit of self-knowledge, the words on the Grecian temple, "Know thyself." And some companies have really figured out how to balance this stuff. Amazon, for example, lets me create a list that reflects my theory of how to sell the things that it puts in its inventory. I can create Cory's list of indispensable reading, or Cory's favorite kitchen gadgets, or Cory's complete toolkit for making your own tinfoil hat. I don't charge them anything for this, and if my theory is right and I sell some stuff with my list, they pay me a commission into my affiliate account. That treats me like a censor, like someone who knows something about the world. Meanwhile, if the users who buy one book on my list buy another, Amazon automatically starts cross-recommending them, treating those users as data as well as sensors. And that's a good balance. But for so long as our tools are designed to allow the privacy-invading equivalent of pop-up ads, we'll get the modern equivalent of pop-up ads, and the balance will be harder and harder to find. If you believe in the privacy bargain, you have to give the public negotiating leverage. We need browsers, computers, and mobile devices that meaningfully manage our data emissions. We need to give the users bargaining chips at the table. For example, there's a great Android fork called CyanogenMod, where one hacker has implemented a feature I enjoy very much. It allows your phone to lie to its apps. Why would you want to do that? Well, today, if you download an app from the marketplace, I have a Connect the Dots game that my toddler likes on long plane rides. The Android will tell you to install this app, you have to give the company that is selling it to you permission to track where you are at all times. It's a take it or leave it offer. Now, people who know about game theory and economics will tell you that you don't get optimal outcomes from take it or leave it offers. But if you use the mod, you can say, by all means, install the app and tell it that I'm going to give it information about where I am. But when it asks, make it up. Invent a random location and send it to the app. If that sort of thing becomes standard in our devices and systems, it will change the dynamic from a smorgasbord where users' personal information is available on the all-you-can-eat basis to a genuine marketplace where you have to offer something compelling to a user in order to get the user's real, negotiated, uncoerced permission to access her data in return. It's nice to talk about laws that will give users the right to their data. And it's easy to wag our finger at Facebook users and talk about how foolish and naive they are to give so much of their privacy to such a manifestly unsuitable guardian. But none of that stuff gets us anywhere until we have the tools that allow users to actually control their data. Thank you.